Welcome, everyone. My name is Katherine Haley, and I'm the Vice President of Programs at the Philanthropy Roundtable. My colleagues and I are thrilled that you're joined with us today for our webinar entitled Future of Education Reform Post the 2020 Election. Our mission at the Roundtable is to foster excellence in philanthropy, protect philanthropic freedom, and help donors advance liberty, opportunity, and personal responsibility. Gatherings like this webinar are designed to deepen understanding and identify ways philanthropy can strengthen civil society. This webinar is being recorded, and we will post it on our website and make sure we include it in a future Roundtable Roundup. So today, I'm thrilled to introduce Derrell Bradford, John Schilling, and Patricia Levesque, incredible leaders in the education reform space. Derrell is 50 CAN's Executive Vice President and a board member of Yes Every Kid, and wears a number of different hats. In his role as EVP at 50 CAN, he recruits and trains local leaders across the 50 CAN network for roles as their CAN leaders and executive directors. He also builds out a network of fellows and local parent advocates known as CAN advocates. Full disclosure, I do sit on the 50 CAN board. I'm also pleased to introduce Patricia Levesque, who is the CEO of ExcelinEd. She has previously served as Governor Jeb Bush's Deputy Chief of Staff for Education, Enterprise Solutions for Government, Minority Procurement, and a number of other efforts to reduce regulation in government in the state of Florida. She also has had a number of roles in the state Florida legislature and is really a leader in K-12 education. John Schilling is the president of the American Federation for Children. He leads the staff and organization's activities and has been with AFC since 2007 and has spent, nearly 20 years in the education reform space. So anyway, I'm thrilled to have these individuals with us, and I'm excited for all of you to pose your questions so we can get to pressing matters top of mind for you. All right, just to begin this conversation, Derrell, I would love to start with you. 50 CAN has advocates at the local level in different places across the country. I think you have 13 state campaigns, and you provide a national network of national voices. Given 50 CAN's place and disposition, what are you seeing at the state level? What are some interesting trends, both during COVID and even now since the election?
Yeah, that's an easy question to answer. Thank you for having me, Katherine, and thanks for everybody else for being on this. And thanks to everybody at the Roundtable for your support of organizations like ours. I would just say that, okay, so from 50 CAN's perspective, we thought it was best to essentially look at the pandemic as far as its educational impact with a worst case scenario in mind. And there were lots of reasons to do that. One was that, early in the year, there was a lot we didn't know, right? So, I'm just outside of New York. New York was what New York is, right? And there was a lot of panic, there was a lot of misinformation, there was a lot of uncertainty, and certainly that trickled down to parents, right? And I think the important thing, maybe this is a setup for this, is that when a governor or a local elected official goes on the 6 o'clock news every night and scares people get scared. Right, their habits change, their desires change, and how they interact with institutions that they know changes, and that includes schools. So for us, we were basically like, look, this is going to be like a 2-year thing. There are lots of reasons why it's going to be a 2-year thing. One is that a vaccine isn't going to be done anytime soon, although we've been proven wrong on that. But 2 is not everybody's going to get it right away, right? Which I think we're still right on. And then the third one was sort of like a set of unspoken but sort of well-known incentives that were suddenly in play, which is that, like, well, for teacher unions who are totally interested in getting, like, lots of teacher pay sort of put on the federal balance sheet through like stimulus funding or whatever, the leverage to open schools or to get kids back in school changed, right? And all of a sudden there was more leverage in keeping schools closed than there was in keeping them open. And so we sort of looked at that and decided, like, hey, top priority for all of our state campaigns is to empower families to navigate a once in a lifetime educational emergency. And the number one easiest way to do that, for us was like, let's give families the money. And so we wrote a couple of briefs. One of them is called Fund Everything. The other one is called Measure Everything. And I would describe them as like an evolution of traditional school choice policy, but solving problems that had sort of represented themselves in the pandemic across our states in ways that they look like we were solving different problems. So for instance, one of our state campaigns, was like, nobody in Hawaii has Wi-Fi, and so we were like, let's chase down gear money, which was like one of the pots of stimulus money that governors had tremendous flexibility around to see if we can buy people hotspots. One of our campaigns in North Carolina, like they passed that bill. Like, we're just going to send families a whole bunch of money. Like, go buy a computer, because I don't know, Best Buy is better at getting computers to people than large school districts who struggle with literacy, let alone like becoming a massive tech hub for hundreds of thousands of families who are going like one-to-one, right away. We had a big push around tutoring, and I think Governor Haslam in Tennessee has done a great sort of like philanthropic push on that. We had a big push on assessment, because what we were hearing from families was that we want to know where our kids are. And so like Tennessee, Texas, Connecticut, for instance, are states that offered sort of early year optional assessments for families, because particularly families of color, they were like, you stop school in the spring, like there was basically sort of a race to the bottom. There's a vacuum about where our kids are. We don't know when they're coming back. You have to give us something, And then I think maybe the last and most important one, I'll shut up because I know there's more to sort of talk about, is that we've been trying to push our folks on boundaries, if you want to call it that, with the opening kind of sort of hypothesis being, if school isn't a physical place, why can't you enroll, right? And the idea of doing that, right? Like, I mean, on the one hand, it assaults the legacy of redlining and sort of like racist school assignment policies and ultimately residential assignment, which are all really important things if you care about, choice for families. But at the same time, like, there are all these opportunities. Like, why can't a kid get the best teacher at any subject if they don't go to physical school, right? Why is it that if I want an in-person option and there's one across the street that's like a Catholic school, or across an arbitrary border that is a jurisdictional boundary, why can't I go to that, right? And so there are a couple of our states have taken those things on, although that's a more like, or arguably more aggressive set of policies to take on. But we think sort of now, especially in what we call the recovery phase, we should have those kinds of things front and center.
I love that. Thank you for providing that context. Patricia, I just asked Derrell what he's seeing nationally. What have you seen, given ExcelinEd's emphasis on model legislation and working with state legislators across the country? What were some of the challenges you saw? And then what were some of the opportunities that you saw in different states, particularly how they use their stimulus gear funds, through the CARES Act? Can you share some of that?
Sure. And I want to begin the way Derrell did and just thank you for your efforts, those of you who are watching, and for Katherine, for you all hosting us to talk about this. Starting with the challenges, let me hit some high points, right? Some big ones, and that is the learning loss that exists. Right. I think data from McKinsey showed that when students were entering school this year, they were experiencing between 1 to 3 months of learning loss for white students and 3 to 5 months of learning loss if you were a student of color. Then they continued to measure, and even into October, when you compared October progress this year to October progress last year, students were still 3 months of less learning in math and 1.5 months of less learning in reading. You have 77% of students still in October are receiving their instruction full-time or part-time through online learning. Yet we know through survey data and other data that there's still almost 5 million students in the country that don't have access to device or internet. So how are they doing their learning if probably 77% of the students are still, expected to learn online? So many challenges that have been out there that states have been tackling. When the federal stimulus funds passed this summer, governors were given a pot of money where they had very broad autonomy in how to spend the funding. Additionally, state agencies had some discretionary, authority over those funds. We saw a lot of governors tackle what we think is a really good thing to tackle, and that is the digital divide. So making sure families, especially low-income families, have access to broadband and devices. We saw many governors deployed those funds to the school districts, like Derrell mentioned, but there were several governors that took that direct to family approach, right? In work that we did, that AFC, that 50 Can, all of our organizations have been engaged with different state governors, whether it was Governor Little in Idaho or Governor Stitt in Oklahoma, Texas. They both provided funding for low-income families, kind of an account, and the families could use it for devices, connectivity, tutoring, instructional materials. In Texas, they had a $30 million pot of money that was directed towards students with special needs that could also be used for devices, but also for therapy. South Carolina, New Hampshire, several state governors that said, we're going to send the money straight to parents, federal funds straight to parents. It was really unprecedented. It was so exciting to see governors take some really bold steps. In Florida, some of the funding was directed toward private schools as a stabilization package, because there are a lot of private schools that serve students on scholarship in the state. So we were really excited to see governors tackle things in a very innovative way. Governor Ducey set up a fund that went towards innovation grants so that small grants could be given to individuals or nonprofits that were developing pods or micro schools or things that were going to be able to serve families in really innovative ways. And then you saw some other really great actions. These weren't with federal funds, but you saw the state of Alaska adopt a partnership with the Florida Virtual School. So within a really short period of time, in the spring, so before last year's school year was over, Alaska started the Alaska Virtual School. Now, it was built with Florida teachers and Florida content, providing instruction to Alaska students last year. But over the summer, Alaska teachers were trained. And then when school started this year, it's Alaska teachers teaching Alaska students with content that had been developed in another state. So a lot of really wonderful things that we saw states really trying to innovate. And then you just have to acknowledge the parents that went out and saw options and created options for themselves, for their kids. You also, I just have to note, there were some, like really bad actors, right? You saw state level actions or district level actions to say charter schools we're going to cap your online enrollment. You did such a good job converting to online instruction, but we're not going to let you have any more students, or we're going to prohibit private schools from opening in person if the public schools aren't opening in person. Or you even saw, I'll call out Fairfax County, publicly shaming families on the school website when parents were seeking alternatives for their own children. So, there were so many challenges, so many innovative things, and you continued to see systems or schools that were trying to make it harder for individual parents and individual families to do things to meet their students' needs.
Gosh, thanks so much for that answer, Patricia. John, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. Can you share with us, American Federation for Children is one of the leaders in advocating for school choice and equipping parents to select the best learning environment for their children. And tell us a little bit of what you saw of how COVID had a direct impact on private schools across the country and sort of where there might be an opportunity of optimism given the 2020 election.
Sure. Well, thanks, Catherine, and great to be with all of you. Patricia mentioned Fairfax County. I live in Fairfax County. I feel compelled to comment here. Fairfax County is one of the largest school districts in America at 190,000 students. They have utterly failed these students since the beginning of the pandemic. And when you sit and you talk to some of the parents in Fairfax County, the anger is just palpable, and it's just been a disaster here. So that's my soapbox comment for our panel, being a constituent here in Fairfax County. Fortunately, my children are grown; I don't have to worry about this. But so, Catherine, I think many, if not most, private schools in America have really stepped up during the pandemic to try and safely and responsibly reopen for in-person learning. And they've done so at a tremendous financial cost. And something that typically gets lost in discussions about private schools is they serve more than 1.7 million students from generally lower income families. And it is these schools and families who have been most at risk because of the pandemic. And we work very hard with national and state allies around the country over the last 6 months to ensure that these folks are not going to get left out of COVID relief. And I think we've been really pleased to see, as Patricia noted, governors using federal COVID relief from the CARES Act to do some innovative things. We've been especially pleased with governors like Governor Stitt in Oklahoma, like Governor DeSantis in Florida, like Governor Sununu in New Hampshire, like the North Carolina State Legislature, like Governor McMaster in South Carolina. And these are governors who really thought, a little bit differently and really tried to directly empower families, whether it was through existing choice offerings in their states or to come up with new ones. And it's my hope that should there be additional COVID relief, and we're working very hard on that as we speak. Congress is winding down. The freight train is picking up steam. They all want to get out of town. Government funding runs out at midnight tomorrow, so they're in a rush to do all of this. But we are very hopeful that this COVID relief package will include a set-aside for non-public schools. As I noted, they have absorbed a huge financial cost to try to safely and responsibly reopen. We're hopeful that there will be a specific set-aside for these schools. And just as importantly, we hope that there will be additional discretionary funds for governors, because look, they've done some tremendous things with these funds. And groups like AFC and ExcelinEd and 50 Can, we're going to be out there in our states, and we're going to be leaning on these governors to really do the right thing with these funds and really try to make this a student-centered approach with these funds.
Love that you said a student-centered approach rather than just sort of continuing to fund the existing system. I would love, each of you sort of touched on this a little bit, given the innovations that we saw with a number of the different governors. When donors are thinking about 2021 and more specifically steps that policymakers and governors can take in 2021, I'll invite you, Patricia, to answer this question, or at least to start, and then I'd love Derrell and John to join. How should they begin to rethink funding the system? Historically, it's a per pupil allocation. It goes to school districts. It eventually goes down to an individual school. Given the innovation that we've seen in a number of these states, what should policymakers begin to think about in sort of changing the way they fund education?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's probably several different things depending on the state that they should be thinking about. And the first and foremost, I would say probably all three of our organizations agree thinking more about how do you get money directly to the families so families can make decisions that best meet their own students' needs. That's probably number one. And what is so exciting, I think, for all three of our organizations is that governors that took steps forward with federal GEAR funds have the opportunity now to continue those programs, codify them, get state funding behind them. Even in South Carolina, where Governor McMaster's took a really bold step and then the courts undid it, there's momentum now because so many parents wanted to access that program to get that program codified. But I would say even more broadly for your audience, there are other funding things that need to be thought through. And one, I'll pick on a state, let's say like Georgia, where the funding model in general is a staffing-based model, right? So instead of funding the students based on the needs of the students, Georgia and some other states have we fund the number of teachers, and the number of teacher aides, and the number of guidance counselors. And when you have such a different way to deliver education and different entities that can deliver education, a staffing-based model just doesn't make sense. So hopefully in some states, that funding model is just completely rethought. Something that all states are having to deal with is funding that is typically based on a number of minutes or average daily attendance or counts of students. States have had to provide all these waivers because so many students are online. So the way that they're, counting engagement is, did the student log on once? Or in some cases, I'd say like in Florida, the funding is, we promise we're going to fund you based on how many students you thought you were going to have, not how many actually showed up, not how many actually engaged. And so these are not good measures, right? And they weren't good measures before when we were funding students who showed up and sat in a seat. We weren't funding whether or not they learned. But there are some states that are taking really thoughtful steps to think through, is there a way to fund based on the actual engagement and learning that is taking place? Utah's thinking about this. South Carolina's thinking about it. We would call it learner validated funding, right? So if a course had 10 big milestones, a paper, a quiz, a test, an oral report, if the student completed 8 out of the 10 of those milestones, then 8/10 of the funding could be provided, or you could get an incentive based on how much the student had learned or completed. I think when states are thinking about this in relation to online learning and a better way to engage, to count students, that can be applied to in-person learning as well. So there are some real opportunities in funding, and moving to student-centered models and getting funding directly to families, I think, is the most important. But there are a lot of other components that need to be thought through as well.
Just to bring Derrell into that, 50 Can really talk a lot about, fund everything, allow for anything to happen. So based on what Patricia just said, Derrell, how would you all respond to that question for encouraging, maybe codifying some of these innovations at the state level?
Yeah, plus $1 million. No, so like a couple of things. So one important thing I think for donors to realize is that all of the work that you are familiar with, right? All the philanthropy that you're familiar with, all the policy work that you're familiar with, is school finance reform, right? Like the underlying thing is, can we get states or whomever to pay for this thing that they do not normally pay for? So I just want to say that because I think it's really important. That said, and to build on what Patricia said, I feel like now is like the best opportunity to both reform and redo state systems of education finance, right? So like on the reform side, right? What are all of the ridiculous things built into how schools and school districts are financed that make no sense, are irrational, or have the wrong incentives. Maybe, the current legacy of like racist redlining policy and all this other stuff, right? All that lives with us when we have, one district that's like, I fund my schools and the money is mine, right? So maybe that's making larger taxing jurisdictions. Maybe that is like, keeping property taxes, but distributing them centrally to everybody instead of, like, it's not like the gas tax. Like, you buy gas anywhere in the state, they use that on roads wherever they want to, right? But your school tax, that's for you. Like there's all kinds of bad stuff built into that. So there's a universal policy solutions that live in the reform side that I think we can get to, and the staffing-based thing, and like no hold harmless and all this other stuff. Now's a really good time to sort of take that on. At the same time, on the redo side, right? All the pandemic as like, and I don't mean to say this in a way to be flip, because like I had COVID and I had a mild case of it, but it's serious, right? And part of the reason why low-income families in particular are, when people are like, you ready to come back to school? They're like, yeah, no, dog, I'll wait, right? Is because they have been heavily impacted by this. Lots of them know people who have lost their lives because of COVID. So it's very serious, and it has changed a lot of behavior. But other behavior has changed as well, right? So like, people are in the mode of solving their own education problems right now. It's like it's a civil society thing, right? Like, people are seeing a district public school that is closed on one side of the street, and on the other side of the street, literally a bunch of happy Catholic school kids in plaid rolling around, like nothing is happening, with Our Lady of Lourdes masks on, the bespoke Our Lady of Lourdes mask. And so that too, it is real, right? And I don't think that can be easily put back. That genie can't be easily put back in the bottle. Here's the last thing I would say about this. Why I think finance reform, and particularly this like reform and redo thing, is sort of like the best opportunity to look at that is because the constituency has changed. So if you work primarily on urban education reform policy, like I do and have, we've been telling people for decades that urban, in particular, large urban school districts are like sclerotic, self-interested bureaucracies, and they put the needs of kids without a lot of choice and without a lot of money, dead last. And people who don't live in those school districts have been kind of like, yeah, sure. And now, like in Tony, Fairfax County, where John Schilling is ribbing people, they too, like all kinds of folks who normally did not experience that dysfunction, now have to experience it as well. And they handle it very differently. Like, it's a completely different political constituency. And if you put both groups of people together, it is a much larger, more diverse political constituency that can ask for change. Well, one last thing on this, because this is my favorite saying now. And Enlo told me this one. So there's 4 ways to spend money, right? I can spend my money on me. I can spend my money on you. I can spend somebody else's money on me, or I can spend somebody else's money on somebody else. And so, like, you're a well-off property tax paying person sending your kid to your local public school, which is really a private school because you're zoned into it, right? You're used to giving your money to somebody to spend on you, right? So like over the last 5 months, your local district has said, no, you can't send your kid here, but we will charge you for childcare. And people are like, no. I want to spend my money on me now, right? And that is just that's a very different approach from a very different group of people who all of a sudden sort of like awoken, who have woken up to the same sort of dysfunctions we've been trying to fix for low income kids for a very long time.
So, John, when you think about, I feel like every time American Federation for Children releases another poll, there's another uptake about school choice, and more individuals, when they hear about it, they're like, yes, I want that. How do you, and this gets at our guest question, how do you leverage the frustration, the angst, potential animosity, anger of parents that are in Fairfax County who suddenly are like, I want choice, I want change, how do you leverage that social capital to benefit all kids, say in Virginia, or more kids in Washington, D.C.? Like, how do you take that and sort of like amplify it to rethink these funding formulas to get it, say, like an education savings account, the funding is portable and you can use it for a variety of things? What do you think, John?
Well, let me start by just acknowledging that I still have scars, Catherine, from the school finance wars in Arizona in the late 90s. It is a tough issue. And as education reformers, kind of the holy grail for us is to change the flow of money. Strap that money to the back of a child and let the child go wherever the parent deems is the best educational environment. That's what we believe in. That's what
Right.
we're always trying to get to. One of the things that that we have seen over the last several years through our polling and through the polling that others have done, support for educational choice is very, very strong across the board. Republicans, Democrats, Independents. There is overwhelming support among African Americans, Latinos, millennials, and parents of school-aged children. And one of the things that we've noticed in one of our polls that we did with Real Clear Opinion Research, between April and August of this year, support for school choice jumped from 67% to 77% among parents of school-aged children. So what does that tell us? What it tells us is, what the pandemic has laid bare for everybody to see is that this K-12 system is in desperate need of greater flexibility and greater choice. And too many families don't have it. I mean, it's a huge problem. And I think the challenge that, our three organizations have and others who do this work and folks out in the States is that what are we going to do to harness the feelings of all of these parents who have been dealing with inadequate delivery of education since March 13th. And I want to take special note of something Patricia said in her opening comments. Learning loss is real. It is real. And we know that millions of students pretty much lost the last 3 months of the previous school year. And this forced remote learning that millions have had to do this year has resulted in huge learning loss. It's a serious problem. And I think our challenge is going to be to try to harness this anger that parents of school-aged children are feeling, try to lean on our policymakers to really help them understand this and really get them to a point where they are pursuing policies, whether this is codifying things that they have done with GEAR funds, whether this is coming up with new policies, to really try to be focused on a more student-centered approach to this. And it's not just at the state level. We do need to do it at the federal level too. Look, most of the energy, most of the action, most of the money is at the state level. But we should not lose sight of the fact that at the federal level, there's about $70 billion annually that goes to help K-12 education. In addition to that, this year, there was another $16 billion from the CARES Act. There could be potentially another $50 billion, that may come in this COVID relief package that's being negotiated. We need to be leaning on all of our policymakers, to really hear the cries of parents and to think differently about how we're doing this.
Can I say one quick thing, Catherine, before we go on? I think that for all the folks engaged in this, I think the one other important thing about this is do not deliver this as a fight about whether or not schools should be open or closed. This has got to be about an emergency response to the needs of parents and families, right? Because if a parent wants an in-person option and has to do that, great, right? But the moment it is about whether or not schools are reopening or not, right? It is, and the polling shows this. The conversation becomes so wildly politicized that it's just extremely difficult to get something done. And the anecdote I will give on that is that in the spring, the teachers unions had like a laundry list of things that they argued were why kids needed to be in school. And they argued that because they were concerned about all of the things we have been talking about taking root. When the president read the same laundry list for why schools should reopen, everybody was like, no. Like everybody changed. And I think Rick Hess was saying, it was just like the moment that happened, the debate was over. And so I would just encourage everyone not to have that specific debate in that specific frame when trying to advance this at the state level.
Well, just speaking of that, John, you mentioned earlier that Congress might be considering another COVID relief package, or they are considering another COVID relief package, and there's efforts to ensure that those dollars that are allocated for education include non-public schools. We have a donor that has asked, what can we do to ensure that they are not cut out? I mean, you have a president who I think would be willing to sign a provision like that. There's question about President-elect Biden. There's question about the makeup of Congress. What can folks do to make sure that all kids are served, not just some kids are served?
Well, if there are philanthropists out there that have good relationships with their federal policymakers, I would urge you to call them today and really lean on them. Look, right now there's really sort of two things in play. Over the last week or so, there was a group of senators and congressmen, a bipartisan group that negotiated a bipartisan COVID relief package. They're calling themselves the group of 908 because the total figure in the bill is $908 billion. But included in this was sort of the middle ground. So the Senate's two targeted bills really contained everything that that school choice advocates really wanted. It included a specific set aside of 10% of whatever the public's got for non-public schools. It included, what was essentially Secretary DeVos's Education Freedom Scholarships proposal. It was redubbed School Choice Now, offered by Tim Scott, Lamar Alexander, and Ted Cruz. And that would have delivered this 10% set aside via scholarships to families. And it would have established a $5 billion tax credit. Sort of the middle ground right now in this bipartisan bill is a $2.5 billion set aside for non-public schools, which would be very important. And it wouldn't be a strict limited formula. It would actually be available for most private schools. This is really, really important, particularly because, as I noted earlier, private schools have worked very hard to safely and responsibly reopen at their own cost. So it would be really important to have this set aside. And then in addition to that, of course, you've got the GEAR funds that do give governors wide latitude in how to use those funds, including directing those funds to education-related entities, which would include, organizations like scholarship granting organizations. What Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi are really digging in on is saying, no, we're not going to give any set aside. We're not going to provide a set aside for non-public schools. That's an outrage. I mean, it's just an outrage. What is the difference, in terms of the pandemic between public school kids and private school kids? The pandemic does not distinguish between public school kids and private school kids. Every child and every family in this nation is affected. And for them to say that, no, we're not going to put a set aside in for non-public schools, and we're just going to go back to what we did in the CARES Act, that's totally unacceptable. So if there are philanthropists out there who have relationships with their federal policymakers, I would urge you to call them today and say, look, support the language that's in the bipartisan bill.
Thanks, John. So really go far and wide if you have a relationship with. A question, just all of you, I know that Patricia, ExcelinEd certainly works with hundreds of state legislators around the country. John and Derrell, you have organizations that are mobilizing different types of voices. What is the most effective voice that persuades policymakers to act in the interest of students and families?
Oh, I would say it's always an actual parent, right? It's an actual parent or a student who can tell their story of either how they were denied an opportunity, the struggles that they faced at a particular school, outlines the challenges of what their child needs but is not receiving. I mean, you can see in committee meetings every time there's legislation up, you will see the parade of, I call them the alphabet soup groups, right? The teacher, the superintendent's association, the school administrators association, the teachers, like all the different education groups who get up and will speak against a family being able to have options for their students. And you get that mom or that student who stands up and can tell their story, and you just see the de-escalation in even some the lawmakers who are opponents, and you just see the members lean forward because truly they want, most of them ran because they wanted to make a difference, they wanted to make changes. And when they have constituents who reach out to them, whom they can solve a problem for, it is really impactful. So I think what's important for all three of our groups, um, for others that work in this space, is to constantly make sure that the front face on this work are the actual students and families, not just our faces because the lawmakers know us, but it's making those stories really real. Um, the other thing that I would just add to this is now is the time to seize the opportunity. I think Derrell said it, John said it. One of the easier ways from a policy or an advocacy organization standpoint to get parents to engage is to actually have bills out there that someone can receive something from, right? So we have got to get policymakers to codify an education savings account or to put in place a policy that allows funds to go into a digital wallet for parents or microgrants or, I mean, other things that we've been thinking about. What about creating part-time public school enrollment so that parents who have actually basically had their child sitting next to them when they've been at home doing, they've been homeschooling, even though they haven't been the ones necessarily delivering all the instruction. A lot of parents have gotten a taste of, I really like being around my kid, right? I see what they're doing. I want to be engaged more. I can't do it full time every day. I do have to work. I do have other things. So I think giving the opportunity for students to be enrolled part time in the public system, and then the parent is, taking on 2 or 3 of the courses that they feel comfortable taking on. There are so many different innovations that are out there. It's our job, all three of our organizations, to get a lot of bills filed that then the media will report on them because they will be controversial. And then parents can see what is out there, what is what they could possibly have. A lot of times parents don't know what to ask for because in many states, nothing like this exists. Who knew that public funding could follow a parent and I could pick what works best for my child? And so it's our job to get some of these things moving, to communicate through our own networks, to get the media to cover it, because then I think parents will figure out, I want that. I want to have that. And then we will be able to harness more of these voices that are out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Catherine, just to amplify what Patricia said about the voices, and I know Derrell will have a lot to say about this as well. This is just really important. And one of the things that we're doing at AFC is our Voices for Choice campaign, and we've built a network of school choice alumni around the country. We've now published about 600 stories on our voicesforchoice.net website. We've identified these remarkable young people that we call Future Leader Fellows. We're now in our second cohort. There's 20 of them from 9 states. These are remarkable young people, most of whom who have been through a choice program, and they're just tremendous success stories. And to have these kids out there, they are just the best messengers for this. And it's just really important. And it's not only important because they can really elevate the issue, because they're a living, breathing example of why this stuff works, why it matters, but they can also ultimately influence policymakers. And that's what it's about for us. That's what we have to do. This is important for philanthropists. It's important for our organizations who rely on the generous contributions of philanthropists. We've got to go and influence these policymakers to do the right thing.
Yeah, and just to build on that too, so we had one of John's fellows in my fellowship. It's wonderfully incestuous, which is called National Voices, which is a focus on media education policy and ultimately bipartisanship, because like the cancer of political division is going to destroy us. And I'd like to thank, and I can see the participant. There are a couple of folks in the chat who have supported fellows in the program, so I'd like to thank you for that. And they are amazing and vital. I will add one important thing though. So particularly on the Democratic side, the demography that we're looking at is sort of like white college educated women hate everything we're about for whatever reason, while enjoying all of the benefits that we talk about, right? And you got like, historically, we have not recruited somebody who can go and square off with Lily Eskelsen Garcia in that way, right? And so I would encourage philanthropists to think about bringing in not just who we would normally have as like a student or a parent who are a strong advocate or or who experienced the sort of life-changing benefits of being able to go to the school that helps you become the best version of yourself, right? But there's this other group of people out there who, like we talked about earlier, thought they had everything on lockdown, moved to the right school district, right? Like had the right money, paid for the right thing, did all this stuff, and then found out that, and then the rules changed, right? They altered the deal. And those people are a completely different constituency than most of the folks that we are trying to convince ever hear from. And so I would say, if you are a local philanthropist and you're interested in bringing in voices, like look specifically at that segment of the population to round out what you offer. But because, and this is the last thing, this is going to sound flip, but I don't think the incoming administration is listening to my people very much right now. If they were listening to my people, we wouldn't hear all this anti-charter school stuff, whatever, because the polling says my people like charter schools, right? And my people put the current president, the president-elect, got him out of the primary, right? I was like, why do you want to go after the schools that my people like, among others, right? Including private schools and all these other things too. And so to me, the fact that we are even having a discussion about a major national union leader, right, who is essentially the co-conspirator in taking the country hostage and arresting the learning of millions of kids by at least a year, not to mention the economy and everything. The fact that is happening means they're not listening to my people. So I just highlight that to say that there's a different political problem I think we are trying to solve. Doesn't mean our traditional core constituency is not important and doesn't need to be out there, because they're experiencing this too. But I think now is a good time to diversify the universe of people who carry that message as well.
Gosh, thank you so much, Derrell. We have time for probably 2 more questions. And somewhat, we heard someone posed a question about sort of in this place of learning anywhere and learning everywhere, and giving parents a taste of that ability to control, select, and sort of shop or purchase their child's education. What then becomes, what's the case then for public schools? Why not a pluralistic system?
I'll go first on that, and I'll be quick. Because sometimes you just want vanilla, right? I mean, just because I can put it all together doesn't mean I want to. right? What I want sometimes is to be able to, right? And in my mind, like a pluralistic system has to embrace the fact that some people might just want to send their kids to the neighborhood school, and that's fine, right? I think the challenge is like, though a pluralist approach includes traditional public schools, a monopolist approach only includes them, right? And that is the kind of like mindset shift I think we gotta get to on that.
Yeah, it's choice,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's choice. This is what it's all about. I mean, what we want is, we want every family in America to be able to choose the best educational environment for their child, and it can be any one of these things, right? It can be a traditional public school, it can be a charter school, virtual school, magnet school, private school, homeschool. We just feel like we got to put these families in the driver's seat. And a plethora of options is a good thing.
And I would just add to it that what you can see in other countries that have a more pluralistic system is you really have a vast array of what you would consider magnet programs, right? Now it flips the dynamic where the school is trying to keep you interested in sending your child to that school. So the programming becomes better and tighter and more focused. The responsiveness of the system to the parent, who is the customer, becomes better, right? I'll never forget, I had to go pick up my child. This was in kindergarten for an appointment. And I went into the office area to pick him up for his appointment. There were 3 people sitting behind their computers. And I swear, I was clearing my throat. I was doing everything to get these 3 women to pay attention to me so that I could pick him up to go to a dentist appointment. You know what? If everybody had the ability, if I was a real customer, even that level of contact between the school and the parents would be completely different. It would be like it is now at a private school where I'm greeted on a first name basis, where what can I help you with? They already know the name of my child connected to me, right? It is a completely different educational experience when the customer, the parent, has power in the relationship and the school is trying to do its best to meet your child's needs. That's why I so strongly believe in choice and giving parents that opportunity. The public schools would completely change how they work with most parents and kids.
Thanks, Patricia. We had a quick question about, how do you mobilize parents with means to understand that choice is something that all should be able to benefit from. And I think we touched on that question a little bit during this time, but it's really about communicating and sort of, I think, illuminating the eyes of parents that, I want this for all, myself and all in my community. I want to get at one last question that one of our donors have posed, and that's a question about what do we do for juniors and seniors and those that are entering college for the first time. The Biden administration, or the President-elect Biden, his transition team is talking a lot about workforce and build our way out. And how do you ensure that those kids that are juniors, seniors, first year in college, particularly those that might be first generation high school graduates, first generation college goers, that they don't get lost and that we can really continue this build momentum? So what from a policy perspective, or what specifically from philanthropy can be done to make sure that those students are not lost?
Sure. Catherine, you want me to take that? I think there's the immediate problem, and whomever wrote the question, right, is absolutely correct. There are kids, a much smaller percentage of students we know who graduated last year are actually pursuing post-secondary education. Now, one of those reasons might be they're taking a planned gap year because they don't want to start their college experience online. But likely a huge number of those students are just not pursuing it because we've lost them, right? There wasn't a good handoff. There isn't attention being paid between the transition between secondary education and what's next. And it's really a longer term structural thing that needs to be fixed in our education systems, in that we know that the jobs of the future, the vast majority of them that are going to pay a family sustaining wage, right, require some form of post-secondary education. But yet we have created our high school system so that high schools are motivated to get you to walk across the stage and don't let the door hit you in the way out as you're departing. There is so much that needs to be done to connect what's happening in K-12 to post-secondary through college and have it all tied into actual real world labor market needs, right? We shouldn't be preparing kids or offering them only training in areas that are dead end, low wage, have no actual career pathways. Our organization has been working with probably 6 or 7 other states that are really thinking far ahead in their thinking on this. We're going to be releasing in February an education to workforce continuum playbook with 21 specific policies identified, everything from making sure kids have access to high quality college and career courses in high school, making sure these things are connected, making sure you have financial incentives on the systems and for the students where there's connections between the transitions. There's just so many things that states need to do. But step one is actually states knowing what they're actually offering. We did some research, and there are 24 states that actually collect data on what their students are taking and earning in high school. And of those states, only half are moderately aligned with actual labor market needs in their state or their region. There is so much that needs to be done. As far as the immediate need, there are a lot of tutoring and counseling supports that states could invest in. We saw some governors invest in these types of things. Derrell mentioned Governor Haslam and the Tennessee Tutoring Corps that specifically hired college graduates to do tutoring and some of the advising to help kids succeed, complete, and make better transitions. There are many things that state leaders need to do this next year on specifically coming up with ways to capture those kids that we have lost since the spring until the fall into post-secondary education.
Oh, so good, Patricia. We're near time, and so I would love each of you guys. So John, we'll start with you, then Derrell, then Patricia. One thing that you're really excited about come 2021 as it relates to education reform and what philanthropists should be on their radar.
So I can't say I'm excited about the vaccine in 2021, right? So look, I am very, very excited about 2021 in education reform. What our nation has been through, what our children have been through since the beginning of March this year has been just horrific. But the silver lining in this horror is I do believe that it has created some new opportunities for us as education reformers and for you philanthropists out there. We have a real opportunity to really, as I said, harness the feelings and the needs and the energies of parents of school-age children to really think a little bit differently about how we are delivering education. And I think I know that our organizations are certainly committed to trying to figure out ways to increase the purchasing power of families directly. This is really, really important. And as I said, what the pandemic has laid bare for everybody to see is just how desperately this system needs greater flexibility and greater choice. And I think if we really put our energies to work, our resources to work, we can lean on these governors to codify things they've done with GEAR funds, to enact new programs, and also to encourage a better flow of funds to the benefit of all students.
Yeah, two quick things. So one of the best ways to build an advocate is to start with betrayal. And at the risk of being over the top, like a lot of American families have been betrayed by their local public school districts. So so I don't want to say I'm looking forward to that or optimistic about it. I'm just saying it's out there. The other thing too, just a line from the song, "No money for nothing." I do think this is a moment too where people are very aware of the fact that like school districts are burning cash and not giving anything back for it. And again, I'm not excited about that. However, I'm optimistic about the kind of political coalitions that can be built around such a thing.
And I'll just close with, I think the polling that we have seen that has been pretty extensive of parents, what is so exciting to me is for the first time you are seeing the vast majority of parents saying they don't want to go back to the way it was. They want something different. They want something better. And it's time for philanthropists. It's time for our organizations to capitalize on that sentiment from parents and make sure that we are delivering something that is different and better than what existed before.
I love that. Patricia, Derrell, John, thank you guys so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to all of our donors who joined us and submitted questions. This is a really unique moment. It's an opportunity for us to use the resources, whether it's our time, talent, or treasure, to really help influence the hearts and minds of decision makers to think that they need to think about the families and students that they serve. So we are so grateful for you. So thanks again, and we wish you all a joyous holiday season. Thanks again. Bye-bye.